Do you guys remember how crazy gaming was in the 90s? If you weren't there, it was insane. Picture this. You bought a game like Super Mario 64, you played it, then get this. You finish it. As in, it ended. You could play it again if you wanted to, but it was totally optional. Technically, you didn't even have to beat it at all. Freaking psychos during the 90s, dude. I told you it was insane. How does it work now, you ask? Well, I think over time we've gotten a lot more reasonable. You see, nowadays, companies have realized that your free time is not a precious gift, it's an untapped resource. Long gone are the days when most developers were just trying to make the most fun game. No. We can't go back to the insanity of the 90s. We wouldn't want our shareholders to go hungry now, would we? Look at Timmy over here. He's starving. If you have zero sympathy for Timmy, as you should, perhaps you'll consider joining me on this quest to discover how the industry stopped respecting your time and started charging you to get it back. First, to see how we got to this point, let's have a look at the arcade era. Arcades were pretty much the opposite of live service games because they actually wanted you to lose. Every death in Pac-Man or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles equaled another quarter spent. It was an honest and simple transaction. You give money, the machine gives you a challenge and shiny lights, often with the chance at immortality on the high scoreboard, at least until they reset the machine. Dude, when they used to unplug the Gauntlet Legends machine at the Nickel Arcade to move it to another part of the arcade and I lost my save character, ooh, those frickin' rat bastards. When gaming moved to the living room, the design philosophy shifted to a product model. The pioneer in this regard was the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. But back then, once you ran out of games, you needed a whole new console. Or I guess a whole new stupid sticky sheet thing. These hippies during the 70s were drugged up, dude. They'd be pleased as punch if you placed a pet rock in front of their faces. The NES was a game changer. During this time, most games took place on a single screen, like the aforementioned Pac-Man or Donkey Kong. But the NES hardware was specifically designed to handle smooth horizontal scrolling. So not only did you have arcade quality in your living room, but games were also evolving from single screen stages into traversable worlds. For example, the original Legend of Zelda in 1987 is widely credited with introducing the internal cartridge battery, which allowed players to save their progress directly to said cartridge. Instead of driving to the arcade and sinking endless quarters into a machine for short 5-minute loops, you paid like $50 and you could play Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden as much as your little heart desired until your rage meter filled up and you got grounded for throwing the controller at the family cat. I still love the experience of the arcade personally, but during this era, the developer's job was to make the best game possible. So you would take it to your friend's house, play it together, then they'd put it on their Christmas list and it snowballed into virality one neighborhood at a time. These games respected your time because they already had your money. The transaction was complete, but everything changed once Western developers caught wind of some interesting monetization practices in Asia in the late 90s. I guess they were onto something with that world-ending Y2K business. While some earlier games introduced paying for in-game items like the arcade game Double Dragon 3 back in 1990, where you had the option of quarter-based microtransactions, it would be 9 years later when Nexon released the game Quiz, which is widely considered the first free-to-play business model based on microtransactions. If you're not familiar with Nexon, they purchased the studio that made Arc Raiders, and back in the day ran MapleStory, which was the super spreader responsible for bringing this business model to the Western world. Developers in Asia faced unique circumstances. High piracy rates and pay-per-minute internet cafes made it very difficult to emulate the product model of the West successfully. The Chinese MMO King of Kings, for example, which was released in 1999, is credited with popularizing pay-to-win and establishing the whale dynamic. Now, players with deep wallets could basically buy their way to victory. These free-to-play games create a fascinating ecosystem where the whales and minnows are equally important, albeit for separate reasons. A free-to-play game is obviously much more accessible, and as a result, many of these games attract huge player bases. According to the internet, only about 3 to 5% of free-to-play players ever make a purchase, with 1 to 5% of whales accounting for 50 to upwards of 90% of a game's total revenue. And while the whales are obviously the target, the minnows are equally important. If you don't have a large player base to show off your skins to or completely destroy with your pay-to-win gear, the game falls apart. It's a perfectly effective and awful system. For example, it was revealed that in 2017, Activision had patented a matchmaking system that would intentionally match lower-skilled players that hadn't purchased skins with higher-skilled players that had purchased skins to encourage said low-skilled players to purchase skins. Isn't that fucking wild? There are other examples I I could give from the 90s and early 2000s, but ironically, Western gamers spent years mocking the Asian free-to-play model, calling it predatory, until companies like EA, Activision, and Ubisoft rebranded it as engagement metrics in the 2010s. Just to illustrate how effective these engagement metrics are, the mobile gaming market is responsible for roughly 50% of all gaming revenue to the tune of around $100 billion, with the free-to-play model dominating the charts. This has downstream effects for the entire industry. The reality is AAA development is expensive and risky. Consider the billions of dollars in failures that occurred in the early 80s. AAA development is orders of magnitude more expensive now than it was then. We could deep dive into why game development is so expensive now and whether it is necessarily so, but that's a topic for another video. Consider a couple specific examples. As far as I'm aware, the cost of development for Elden Ring hasn't been officially disclosed, although it's reportedly between $50 and $200 million. It's made roughly $1.5 billion in revenue, a huge success. On the flip side, Forspoken only made an estimated $10 million on an over $100 million budget, a huge flop. But even the success of Elden Ring pales in comparison to the success of fucking Monopoly Go or Chinese mobile League of Legends, which make Elden Ring look like a complete failure in comparison. Why risk a Forspoken failure for Elden Ring money when you can make Diablo Immortal or Pokemon TCG Pocket for a fraction of the cost and a potential 10x profit? The true canary in the coal mine for most people in the West was the infamous Oblivion Horse Armor DLC that so tickled the Bethesda shareholders so as to get us to the point where we are today. Let's do some quick math. According to former Bethesda-led dev Bruce Nesmith, the horse armor sold, quote, in the millions. It received a ton of negative publicity at the time, which likely resulted in its success because, as they say, controversy is free marketing. I played Oblivion when it launched and didn't even know the damn horse armor existed until years later. Prior to its recent remaster, Oblivion sold roughly 9.5 million units. Let's assume to date, roughly 2 to 3 million copies of horse armor have been sold at $250 a pop. This means the game has grossed between $400 and $500 million before the remaster, assuming most copies sold close to the $50 to $60 retail price point, which not all of them would have. One thing you have to understand is that the developer doesn't get to keep all of that. They likely saw closer to 50% after the retailers and platform holders got their cut, not even accounting for Uncle Sam. So again, let's assume their gross revenue for the game was roughly $250 million, with the horse armor being responsible for $6 to $10 million. Assuming platform holders like Nintendo and Microsoft kept 30% of digital sales, that's still roughly $5 million of horse armor money, or about 2% of the game's total revenue. Said another way, the afternoon it probably took to implement the horse armor was as if they had shipped an additional 170,000 units of the game. That's for a single DLC, by the way. That's likely the moment developers realized, why sell more games when you can sell pieces of the same one? Now just wait till you see where things went from there. Modern developers use 4 key methods of weaponizing your psychology and time against you through tricky monetization tactics. Weapon number 1, artificial friction. In ye olden times, if progress in a game felt slow, it was likely a consequence of bad design, or you just had to get good. Games like Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden are infamous for frustrating knockback-related deaths and awful platforming sections. Now, if progress is slow, it's a business opportunity. Why spend 40 hours grinding through Assassin's Creed Odyssey when you can buy the XP boost and rush through it? You aren't paying for more game, you're literally paying the developers to let you play less of the game they designed. Another example is the wildly successful Clash of Clans. Early buildings take seconds to build, with later high-level upgrades taking literal days. I understand you're frustrated that you can't progress as quickly as you did in the early days, but I'm afraid times have changed. Of course, it doesn't have to be this way. If you slip me a Benjamin, I could speed that up for you real quick. Not doing it for you? Well, how about this? We made this super fun puzzle game, and we know you love it, but to protect you from yourself and not play too much, we gave you 5 lives per day. But I'm an adult, why not just let me play as much as I want? You mean you don't want to wait for the timer we designed? Well, it's gonna cost you. The game was free to play after all, and Timmy's getting hungry again. Here's a fun one. Most people don't know this, but just to illustrate how well developers are able to weaponize human psychology, consider World of Warcraft. In the beta testing for WoW, developers implemented an unrested penalty, where you entered a fatigued state after a certain amount of playtime and received half XP from killing monsters. Players hated it, viewing it as a punishment for just playing the game. But instead of removing it, they rebranded it as a rested bonus. The fundamental math remained the same, but they made the lower XP rate the normal rate and gave players a rested bonus, or double XP, at a rate of 5% per 8 hours of rest in a tavern or capital city. Same friction, different psychology, and our experience of it shifts from punishment, "Bad Timmy, how dare you play our addictive game for more than a couple of hours," to reward. "Hey Timmy, here's that bonus XP you earned today. Try not to spend it all in one place. Oh, don't forget to log in every so often, otherwise your bonus XP will cap out. Stay awesome, Timmy." It's difficult to say what the rationale for this was, but if I had to guess, I imagine it had something to do with the fact that the primary monetization for the game was its subscription nature. Perhaps they simply didn't want players to reach max level and get through all the content too quickly so as to keep them on the Blizzard tap for as long as possible. Notice I said was the primary monetization. Weapon number 2, casino mechanics. While I look back at the arcade era with fondness, despite not being old enough to have experienced it in its full glory, I can't help but look at the current loot box era with an opposing sense of revulsion. But thankfully, it seems like people are at least finally waking up to what has been a problem in game development for years now. In fact, the single most downvoted comment in Reddit history belongs to none other than EA. In 2017, they responded to backlash around Star Wars Battlefront 2's microtransactions, arguing that giving them money to unlock characters like Darth Vader gave players a sense of pride and accomplishment. As we speak, Valve is currently embroiled in a series of lawsuits over loot boxes in their games, with the New York Attorney General arguing that these loot boxes constitute illegal, unlicensed gambling, particularly targeting minors, which I imagine is the primary concern for most people. Valve has argued that these digital collectibles are not too dissimilar to collectibles like Pokemon cards, to which I say touché, Valve. But is that entirely true, and is it a mystery that both digital loot boxes and physical loot boxes, aka Pokemon cards, are worth billions of dollars? Why do we as consumers keep falling for these tactics? Well, my friends, let me introduce you to the concept of cognitive psychology. Companies these days can essentially predict human behavior because we're really not as complicated as you might think. The gambling mechanics of loot boxes and Pokemon cards are pretty simple, really. They take advantage of what behavioral psychologists call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. To understand this, we have to look back at the 1950s with B.F. Skinner and his famous rat boxes. Skinner found that if you give a rat a pellet of food every single time it presses a lever, it eventually gets bored and only presses it when it's hungry. But if you randomize the reward, meaning the rat presses the lever and sometimes gets food and sometimes gets nothing, the rat will obsessively slam that lever until it passes out from exhaustion. Because the brain doesn't know when the jackpot is coming, it treats every single pull of the lever as the potential winner. Now check this out. Rat lever with food? Nah. Human lever with money? Now we're talking. This is the exact foundational science of the casino slot machine, completely unregulated and dropped right into our living rooms. But here's where the neuroscience gets even more interesting. When we open a loot box, our brain floods with dopamine. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, it's the anticipation chemical. The highest spike of dopamine doesn't actually happen when you get the ultra-rare knife skin or gacha game character, but rather when you're filled with the anticipation of the possibility for that skin. This is the same reason why it feels so good to swipe down on your phone and fill your YouTube scrolling feed with more potential videos. It's a literal slot machine mechanic. I would argue that Valve isn't entirely wrong with their comparison. Most of you watching this video likely know the rush of opening up a pack of Pokemon cards, whether as a kid or even now as an adult. There is a ton of content on YouTube that is literally just watching people open up rare and expensive packs of cards that get millions of views. But here's why their digital equivalents are actually even more insidious. First, physical cards have natural friction and are, for better or worse, finite. They can only print so much. So between the scalpers and collectors and having to drive to the store in many cases, Timmy only has so many boxes left to spend his mommy's credit card on unless he wants to shop online and pay scalper prices. But even then, there's a limited supply. Second, and more importantly, this might be controversial, but physical cards cards have actual tangible value. If you pull a Charizard, you own an asset. You can grade it, put it in a binder, trade it to a friend, or sell it to recoup your money. When you pull a digital knife in Counter-Strike or a skin in Overwatch, you can effectively do the same, but you technically own absolutely nothing. You are simply paying for a temporary license to view pixels on a server that the company can and eventually will shut down. They could also flood the market with skins for everyone with a few lines of code. In October 2025, Valve introduced a little update to Counter-Strike 2 that caused a loss of roughly $2 billion in digital skin value within 24 hours. All they did as far as the skins were concerned was allow players to trade up 5 covert skins for a guaranteed knife or glove. When you take this hyper-optimized, frictionless slot machine and put it in front of miners, we have to consider something important. Where exactly is the line between clever business model and moral hazard? The human prefrontal cortex, or the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and understanding long-term consequences, doesn't fully develop until we are in our mid-20s. Throwing a psychological weapon designed by PhDs at a 12-year-old and calling it a surprise mechanic is like selling candy to a baby if the baby had access to its mother's credit card number. But that's not all. Here is where video game companies take it to the next level. Consider the concept of currency decoupling. There is a study I reference in another video that explains how credit cards decouple the joy of a purchase from the pain of the price, but psychologically savvy developers put this concept through an additional filter. By making you purchase a different currency first when you finally purchase the skin or item, you're now twice removed from the pain of the price because it's easier to spend what feels like play money that you purchased with credit card data that's been saved to your account, so you don't even have to pull out the physical card anymore. They also, of course, sell you this currency in an amount that doesn't match the item you want to buy, encouraging additional spending once you're stuck with the leftover currency. This takes advantage of the sunk cost fallacy, which I'll talk about more a bit later. Weapon number 3, the FOMO Factory. By making rewards and content seasonal, developers turn your hobby into a second job. If you don't play this week, you risk missing out on those skins or that season forever. Many people don't play because they want to, they play because they're afraid not to. Just as the septum piercing is the gold standard for communicating emotional stability, the gold standard of FOMO in game design is the Battle Pass. Epic Games essentially perfected this by linking the Battle Pass to seasonal content, and now essentially every modern live service game follows in their footsteps. They truly walked so their predecessors could crawl. If you don't continue to play to earn the rewards you already paid for, you lose them forever when the new season rolls around. Another shining example is rotating item shops. I talk about this in another video in relation to crumble cookies, but have you noticed all the cool new collabs or seasonal content drops that companies have been doing? Recently, my wife was all excited to tell me that Uniqlo was doing an Animal Crossing collab. Uniqlo's over here like, gotcha, bitch! Or how about Supreme, arguably the founder of modern retail FOMO? What Fortnite is to gaming, Supreme is to apparel. Speaking of Animal Crossing, and while not egregiously monetized the way that these live service games are, a comparatively innocuous example would be its seasonal events, like the fact that you can only catch certain bugs or fish during specific real-world weeks. Weapon number 4, the sunk cost. When thinking about how all 4 of these weapons work together, artificial friction slows you down, forcing you to pay to overcome it. Casino mechanics hook their claws into you, filling you with anticipation, and FOMO keeps you coming back for more, but weaponizing the sunk cost fallacy is the anchor that brings it all together. It's the reason many people are stuck playing League of Legends for years, even when they're not really having fun anymore. If you enjoy League, by the way, no hate here. I used to play it a ton with friends, but I'm the only person amongst said friends that's just too cheap to spend a single dime on skins. The more hours and money you invest into a particular ecosystem, the harder it is to leave. You already spent $500 on League of Legends skins? Well, this is your game now. You put 4,000 hours into Counter-Strike. If you stop now, you're not just quitting the game, you're walking away from a rank it took you years to build up that doesn't exist anywhere else. And it's not just the money. When I read the comments on some of my other videos that mention things like the sunk cost fallacy, I'm surprised to see no one really mentioning the social component. Many of these games are designed to make your friends the enforcers. If you're a healer for your WoW raid group or the 5th man in a League of Legends comp, quitting the game feels like quitting a team. Developers love taking advantage of this feeling of social obligation. Fortnite recently introduced the ability to gift a battle pass, for example. Would you feel worse if you wasted your own money or your friends' money? They've basically turned your friends into unpaid marketing interns. Kind of feels like the design of these games has been modeled after a tech job with coworkers and deadlines, but now your engagement is being monetized without the paycheck. So was the horse armor the official death of the game that respected your time? Well, thankfully no. It appears the industry is going through a huge counter movement at the moment. Look at some of the biggest games of the last few years, as well as some of the most historic flops. Elden Ring doesn't have a battle pass. Baldur's Gate 3 has no daily login. Yes, they're long-ass games, but just like those crazy 90s, you don't have to complete them, and most people who do probably feel rewarded rather than driven by fear of missing out. Clearly, people aren't rejecting long games, they're rejecting gamer extortion. These developers respect our time by acknowledging that our time with their art is finite. Wait, how many hours do you have on Elden Ring again? There are countless indie games coming out every year that equally respect your time, and honestly have done so for years, which is one of the main reasons I personally have found myself more attracted to indies than AAA for probably a decade now. Consider a game like Slay the Spire or Hades. I haven't had a chance to check out the sequel to either of these yet, but we'll definitely be rectifying that someday soon. These games offer near infinite replayability, but do so through 30 to 60 minute self-contained runs. You can play through a single run, experience a complete arc of progression, then turn off the game for a month without feeling like you're missing out on hitting the leaderboards or the next season of content. But don't just take my word for it, here's some data to back it up. According to a 2025 report, 75% of the top highest rated games on Metacritic were developed by indie studios. This is nearly double their share from several years ago in 2016. And players are actively voting with their wallets. Market data from Newzoo's recent PC and console gaming report shows that the $30 to $50 price point is currently the fastest growing tier across all platforms. One last interesting piece of data to bring it all home, released by Media Research in late 2025, is 53% of gamers prefer single-player experiences, with that number increasing as player age increases. This is despite the fact that live service and online multiplayer capture roughly 76% of total online gaming revenue. So we have companies chasing that 76% of the revenue pie in service of an increasingly shrinking target demographic, as there can only be so many live service games. And that's how we got games like Concord and Highguard that have epically flopped, showing a growing level of live service fatigue. There seems to be a massive disconnect between publishers and players being left with a feeling of who the hell are these games being made for? Hopefully the live service fatigue continues to balloon, because honestly there are just much better games out there, and I think we're on track for a course correction. It's like the industry is currently in a war between engagement metrics and artistic integrity. Who wins is decided by how we consumers vote with our time and dollars. Come, my fellow gamers, the fate of the industry hangs in the balance. At the end of the day, games should be an escape from work, not a continuation of it. Personally, I'm not necessarily advocating for the complete abstinence of live service games as some others do. If you want to play Marvel Rivals or Dota 2 with friends, more power to you. However, if you find yourself feeling burnt out on gaming, as many people online have been expressing, it's probably not you, but rather the fact that you're being taken advantage of for the sake of engagement metrics. But I want to hear from you guys. What are some games in 2026 that actually respect your time? Let me know in the comments, and if you're like me and you're struggling with a giant backlog you've been trying to tackle before the inevitable heat death of the universe, maybe check out this video next for my master plan on how we can slay the backlog beast for good.